So as mentioned earlier, one of HAI's primary goals is to foster cutting-edge interdisciplinary AI research to advance the human condition. And I spoke a bit about our research programs, which are primarily focused on academic researchers, but we also have at HAI industry programming. So this is to engage researchers with industry researchers and industry leaders. And bringing these two sectors together can ensure that AI research is not only innovative and thoughtful, but also practical and applicable to real-world scenarios. HAI's industry engagement spans the globe and includes research collaborations, professional education, and strategic partnerships. These programs allow us to move the research from the lab into the real world more quickly, which is essential in a fast-moving field like artificial intelligence. So this next panel, titled From Research to Real-World Impact, aims to facilitate a deeper understanding of the importance of research being applied to real-world challenges and how industry experience can inform fundamental research. The panel will be moderated by Steve Cousins, Executive Director of the Stanford Robotics Center and founder of Relay Robotics. Welcome, Steve.
Well, thank you all for having us. It's very exciting to see such a great presentation today. I wanted to introduce the panel to start off. We've got an amazing group for this topic of going from academia or from research to the real world is the topic. And our panelists have all had stellar academic careers in robotics at different institutions and for a long time. So before I founded Savio, I ran Willow Garage. We had the PR2 robots, humanoids. We had a beta program. And all of the panelists used those robots. So I'm very happy about that. We saw Rod this morning talking about actually a couple different examples of towel folding or t-shirt folding. And Pieter Abbeel, who's the first one on our panel, was the first person to use a PR2 to try to fold laundry. It was towels in that case. But that was a long time ago, 15 years ago. And so things continue to go on. Charlie is the Chief and Technology Officer of Hello Robot. Charlie has, I've known him since the PR2 program as well, and was instrumental in the Robots for Humanity project, and I'm sure you'll talk more about that. Andrea Thomaz is co-founder of Diligent Robotics, and I spent the last couple of years at Relay Robotics looking at the hospital market, and I understand how hard that is, and so I have a lot of appreciation for the work that you've done as well. So I'm very excited to have this panel today. Let me just jump in and start with each of you to ask you to tell us a bit about your transition from research to industry, because you've all gone from tenured faculty to being a co-founder. And just describe briefly what your company does so everybody knows. And a couple quick questions as you go through it. What kept you from making the jump earlier? So was it just getting tenure, or did you hang out until there was some point? And did you jump in with both feet, or did you keep kind of a part-time relationship as you did it? And maybe I'll start with Pieter.
That could be a long answer. Let's see. So in my case, I wrapped up my PhD in 2008. I always thought it'd be really interesting to put things into the world beyond just working in academia. But the things I was working on didn't really lend themselves to go into the real world. It was too early, and I remember thinking at the time, if you get a PhD in AI in 2008, you have two choices. You become a professor and can continue to work in AI, or you go to industry and you work in something else than AI. Those were kind of the two options, very different from how it is today. And so for me, academia was a natural choice because I really wanted to work in AI. And so it was just, that was the path. And the real world had to wait a little bit. At some point, things, of course, started to work better and better and better. Starting 2012, it became clear that if you're willing to pile enough data into a neural network, at some point it's going to give, and it's going to kind of do what you want it to do. And so come 2017, with 3 students, I co-founded Covariant. We felt the time was right to go in and see if we can effectively collect enough data, architect the neural network correctly to get this to do real things in the real world. My audio's kind of going in and out, I think. Not sure why, but good now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
So in terms of your question on when to jump, I think pre-tenure maybe it would have been hard. I don't know if I would have done it. It seems like a nice security to have. I'm not saying you have to wait, but it's like a nice fallback, because startups don't always go exactly the way you hope for. A lot of uncertainty, a lot of risk. And I think having a foot in academia is really nice, because the field moves so fast that it's very hard to keep up with everything happening unless you force yourself to. And keeping a foot in academia allows to force yourself to constantly keep up with the latest happening, which I think is really both interesting and really important to stay at the frontier. Not sure if I want me to say more about the company. I feel like I'm going on for a long time, Steve. I'm not sure how long an answer you want.
Just say briefly what the company does, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, so at Covariant, we were building AI to power robotic automation. And our focus was on warehouse automation. So if you look at warehouses, a lot of tasks are done with robots already, especially if you go to Amazon warehouse. A lot of mobility is done with robots, but then the hands, as Rodney referred to earlier, is harder. And so we said, let's look at the hands, let's see what we can automate about the hand work, make that essentially more cost efficient, faster, and so forth. And we spent a lot of time on that. We, I think, deployed into 10 plus countries, and I think over 30 different customers. But then also in August signed a deal with Amazon to go spend a lot of time there and help Amazon deploy this kind of technology into their facilities. And I'm now full-time at Amazon on leave from Berkeley to help make that happen.
Nice. Andrea?
Okay, yeah, a lot of similarities. I also finished my postdoc and was starting my first faculty position in 2008. And it was, certainly if you wanted to keep working in robotics and AI, academia was the way to go. I also really appreciate the talk that Maya just took us through. And I think that human-robot interaction is what I was really passionate about. AI-powered robotics, machine learning algorithms for robots, but in particular, like putting those robots like right next to people and having them, learn things from people was what I was always passionate about. And somewhere around like the 2015, 2016 timeframe is when it started to feel like there is an opportunity from sensing technology, actuators, cost of things, open source. Projects. It was a lot of things were kind of swirling together to make it possible to think about, where would you think about taking some of these things that we're doing in research and putting them into practice. And for me, I became really passionate about, and it's kind of proven true at Diligent Robotics. So Diligent Robotics, we build robots for hospitals. We have a product called Moxie that we launched the company in 2018. Spent, I would say, the first 2.5 years was really just like a commercial version of my research lab. But then, by about 2021, we were starting to deploy robots across the country, doing transport tasks in hospitals. So we navigate hospital-wide and are able to take lab samples, medications, supplies, and lightweight equipment, and truly kind of augment, we call it workforce augmentation, for clinical staff who over the past number of years have been highly understaffed, and it's a workforce that really needs help. And so what I've been struck by in kind of the jump from research to commercialization is that in kind of HRI research, you're always, if we look at like all of the examples that Maya just showed, her students had to create basically products in order to get them to work well enough and actually, just put it in somebody's home and collect a bunch of data. And in the end, your students don't get to talk very much about all that productization of robotics that went to it. So it was very satisfying in the jump from research to commercialization to get, that kind of credit for the, making things work for real. and just seeing the actual human-robot interaction. Like if we don't get that right, then people just aren't going to use Moxie, and it's a pretty interesting evaluation metric.
Great, Charlie.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I love hearing the stories because it's amazing how far back it goes, right? I mean, it really started with my PhD training with Rod Brooks, who gave the talk earlier, which was excellent, in Dorset. And then I did a postdoc in Rod's lab with my co-founder, Aaron Edsinger, and we worked with a humanoid robot that had 2 arms. And what we did was this very close physical interaction with that humanoid robot, and it was focused on this task of putting things away, like putting groceries away in physical collaboration with the robot. And I think we got a Best Paper award together at a humanoid robotics conference. After that, I went to Georgia Tech in 2006, and I wanted to take that notion of assistance seriously. One frustration I had was that lots of papers would give this motivation of, and this will help older adults, this will help people with disabilities, but it was more of this kind of throwaway motivation. My lab, I wanted to take it very seriously, so I founded the Healthcare Robotics Lab, and we focused on how mobile manipulators might provide beneficial physical assistance to people with disabilities and older adults. We had a lot of success. We created our first mobile manipulator. I guess we were publishing on it in 2008. Then we adopted the PR2 robot, another mobile manipulator. Helped start this Robots for Humanity project, which was fantastic.
And shout out to Henry, who's sitting.
Is Henry here?
Yeah.
Okay, Henry and Jane are out there. They're amazing people and have absolutely been critical to all of this, frankly. So, wow, cool. Yeah, so take a beat here. So, I think the thing I want to emphasize is that my lab and through these collaborations, we kept seeing that there really is a real potential for this technology, these mobile manipulators, to actually make a difference in people's lives. And our collaboration with Henry and Jane, having the PR2 at their home, and the ways in which Henry was able to use it to enhance his life on a daily basis, it was inspiring, it was real, and super exciting. Everything's looking great, hundreds of people. It seems like this is just going to change the world. And then, 2016, Willow Garage unfortunately no longer existed. There weren't really any robots out there to do this sort of thing. I wasn't seeing anything happening out there. It had been 10 years, it's 2016. I'm not seeing it get out there, and that was extremely frustrating. And that frustration led to me and my student Henry Cleaver inventing a new robot that we thought might be able to actually go out there into Henry's homes and other places to help. Now, that started a very long journey. Founded Hello Robot with Aaron Edsinger in 2017. We create this very, I would say it's unique robot. It's a mobile manipulator, but it's lightweight, compact, yet dexterous. It's really designed to work closely with people and to be able to meet these use cases and help people in their homes. But it's been a long road, but we've focused on R&D market. A lot of classes, used in classes, used in research. They're all over the world. Love seeing how people are using them. And then we've had a research effort in collaboration with Henry and Jane and others and academics to really try to push this technology forward to actually get it out there. And now we're sort of on the cusp of finally being able to commercialize that aspect of it as an assistive product. But we still have a ways to go.
Yeah, thank you. So there's a lot of ways we can go with this panel, and I want you to make sure I save time for the audience to add questions as well. But let me start off with a question about the market. So you've all been around in the market for a little while. And given the current funding climate, which seems a little bit more, let's say, humanoid-centric, if you were starting over, would you choose the same market, and would you choose the same robot form factor? And maybe I'll start with Andrea this time. Sure.
I would think yes and yes is the short answer, but I'll say a little bit about why. So we came into thinking about where we could bring robots that were going to truly augment a team of people and take advantage of some of the expertise and our favorite problems of putting people and robots directly together. So every single task that our robots do, every delivery task, there's a person there's a person involved. And so, we really like that aspect of it. And I think there are just a number of markets where that's going to be the case. But, hospitals are a really interesting first market. And when you look at the form factor, I think mobile manipulation is, by far the form factor that has the most value to add. We can argue about what the actual end effectors should be, whether you need one arm or two arms, and whether you need to be bipedal or wheeled. But in a hospital, it's an ADA compliant environment. I would never decide to walk around with a robot.
Don't need a second arm?
There's actually no need. I mean, you could need a second arm eventually, but what we're doing today is transport tasks where the things we're transporting need to be locked. Like, I can't be carrying them around in free space. It's very important for the tasks that we do that they're locked. So, the thing that we use the arm for, you have to kind of understand the inner workings of a hospital, but the places where stuff comes to and from is on the basement and the first floor. So it's the lab, the pharmacy, and central supply. But all the places that stuff needs to get to and from are, stacked in the rest of the building. And so everything that you're doing from a mobile manipulation standpoint has to do with navigating that human environment. So, scanning badges to get into secure areas or pushing buttons to open doors and take elevators. So for that task that we're doing today, we need one arm. So we may have future morphologies that require multiple arms, but.
Yeah. Charlie?
Right, yes.
You designed it for this?
Yes.
But no changes if you were.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I really am passionate about the R&D market. I mean, I've just been so amazed by what people are able to do with it. We sell an open source platform that people can hack on and do their own things. And I absolutely want that to exist. And I love it. And it's just been amazing what we've seen. And then on the assistive market, I mean, we're still pushing on that, and we're going to get there, and that's also deeply important to me. So in terms of the markets, absolutely. And in terms of the form factor, look, I'm always very open about different options. I just want to solve the problem. Yeah. It turns out that for the particular types of uses that we're interested in, the platform we have has real benefits. It's compact and lightweight and pretty safe around people. It's not that kind of use case is not a great match for humanoids. A lot has changed in AI, but the physics is the same. The potential energy that can transfer into someone, that's the same. The kinematic reachable workspace and the swept volumes that are happening as the robot is moving, that hasn't changed. And so I think a lot of the elements that really are going to match a physical design of a robot to a use case haven't really changed that much over those years.
Pieter, I wanted to ask you, what's the most surprising thing you found? So you went into this from academia into logistics, which is a very specific market. What's the most surprising thing you found as you got into sort of out of academia and into the quote unquote real world?
Yeah, so when we started Covariant, we first decided, okay, we see a path to build much more capable AI-powered robots than anybody had been building. But then the question becomes, okay, what do we build it for? Because if you're just building highly capable AI-powered robots and they're not solving a problem, then you're kind of like not really building a business. So in the first year of Covariant, we met with, I think, about 200 companies to understand what is it that they would like to get done by a robot if they could get it done. Some things were completely out of reach, were just not possible to do. Other things seemed too easy, they just hadn't tried and they could buy somewhere already at the time. And so for us, logistics was this nice sweet spot where things were still pretty hard to get working. So having an edge in the AI side of things would give you an edge in building something that maybe very few others or nobody else could build at the time. Yet a lot of demand because there's just a lot of objects that have to be moved around. The number of touches from unloading from the truck that gets to the warehouse to actually packaged to your home and then delivered at your home, so many touches, all of them done by human hands, whereas a lot of the transport is done by robots and vehicles. So we decided that's what we push on. I think the biggest difference between the work we had done academically, both at Berkeley and at OpenAI at the time, where I was splitting my time, was in academia, it's really a lot of focus on, can you show something that's never been done before? Like, are you the first to, I don't know, 100 meters deep in the ocean, nobody's been there, can you show that this is actually possible, right? Or can can a neural net recognize a cat, let's say, which 10, 15 years ago was like, oh my God, you managed to do that, nobody ever did that. But nobody ever in academia pushes it to 99.99% reliability of recognizing that cat. That's not our problem in academia. It also doesn't have to be, but it's just a very big difference. And I think that's where things really change. If you deliver something in a commercial environment or just in a home, it just has to work. And that can mean many things. It could mean there are humans around, as Maya was talking about, and they are your fallbacks. And the robot doesn't have to do everything on its own. It can fail, it's okay. But there needs to be a human fallback. That human is happy to help out, happy to interact with the robot, and make the whole process succeed. Or the robot just has to be so good and succeed on its own. But somehow the whole system has to work. And just saying, hey, 85% is the highest metric ever been achieved on this benchmark, take our robot, you'll be happy. That's just not how it goes down. And so to us, that was a very big difference, because now you start collecting way more data, much more specialized very often to get to what you want. Then you push hard enough, you start realizing some things just don't work for you. Maya was saying, hey, there's just no robot available for us to work with that we want to get. Same thing for us at Covariant at the time. The 3D cameras out in the world were not accurate enough. Even though there was so many companies building 3D cameras, they just fail on things like glassware, they fail on plastic packaging, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, 90% of the time these 3D cameras are very good, then 10% of the time they fail. We cannot fail 10% of the time, so we got to build our own 3D camera system. And so you run into a lot of things that it turns out you have to do yourself to get the whole system at the level that you want it to be. So that, I wouldn't say it was necessarily had to be a surprise, but it was definitely a very big shift in how, what we were working on, what we had to focus on to get things done. To your earlier question, Steve, was it, would we do it the same now? I think for the things we're looking at Covariant, the world has dramatically changed. The capabilities of AI and the way AI is built is very different from 8 years ago when we started Covariant. 8 years ago, the winning strategy was lots of data and a strong team, of course, on the problem you care about, whereas today, you need to mix in tons of internet data and go much larger scale model training to get the generalization that you cannot get from narrow data. I think the other thing that's dramatically changed is I think the funding ecosystem is completely different today from 8 years ago. 8 years ago, until recently really, funding was kind of following the same model at all times. It was, we're going to fund something where you have to be a scrappy team that tries to build a product, get in consumers' hands or enterprise hands as soon as possible, learn the lessons, iterate, iterate, iterate. And that still exists very much so, but there's a whole parallel funding system that's pioneered by OpenAI and has been adopted by other companies since, which is, we're not building anything for anyone anytime soon. We're going to build something so capable that once we're there, we'll see it. And all of a sudden, it'll commercialize itself pretty much, right? And OpenAI proved out that this can kind of work. ChatGPT makes an enormous amount of money, but when we started at OpenAI, there was no sense of we're going to build a chatbot. It was just build AI, actually back then, for the greater good, for the good of the world, but then of course was turned to for profit later. But it was not meant to be a scrappy product iteration. It was meant to be, there was something so big that we don't even know what it's going to look like, but yeah, with many billions of dollars, we might land it and it's going to be worth trillions, right? And I think that's a very big decision in many ways. If you start a company today, that's a decision you didn't have to make 8 years ago. Today, you can start a company and say, we're going to go after something so big, I can't even tell you how big. It's probably going to take, $1 billion in the first year. Give us $1 billion on 5, $1 billion on 10. We'll put the best team together you can possibly find. And this is possible. This is absolutely possible. And so now all of a sudden, I think you have a choice right away, which way you want to go. That doesn't mean you don't run into trouble. That doesn't mean there's always a ChatGPT at the end of the tunnel. But the investors are counting on there being a ChatGPT equivalent at the end of the tunnel.
It's very frustrating as somebody who started a company 12 years ago. We didn't have that. In fact, I was playing with, it's funny your comment about how the funding situation's changed, because I was going to ask Andrea, and I'll ask you anyway. I was playing with the theory for a long time that hospitals and venture-backed startups are incompatible, right? Because hospitals move so slowly and venture capitalists want something so fast. So are you seeing something different?
Yeah, I mean, I think you certainly, I mean, there's absolutely a market, or there's definitely some great investors for digital health and health tech startups. Like when we were first starting, like those categories of people that want to invest in like hospitals and healthcare and these like long sales cycles, they understand it. And the kind of people who are going to back a like hardware startup, those were like, the Venn diagram of that was like almost nothing. But as soon as you start to have some proof points, for us, it was really about finding the right initial investors who've stuck with us and been able to continue to fund that journey. It is absolutely two parallel universes. And, for better or worse, if you started off in this universe, there is no crossing back over to the other universe. And so, but yeah, I think you've got a product and you're building it and you're building the whole end-to-end service and you've got customers and you're servicing them and they're continuing to grow the business. And I think that, there's also a lot of great automation stories in hospitals. I think Intuitive Surgical and a lot of different, ways in which healthcare and hospitals have created very large companies. So I think it can happen.
And Charlie, you've kind of you started out for the first few years self-funding the company and organically growing it. How do you feel now about the opportunity, or are you looking to raise $1 billion or so, or what's your plan?
It's really interesting. I mean, I think it's great to have more funding for robotics-oriented efforts, AI-oriented efforts. But when I hear about that other parallel path, I just think, oh, thank goodness I don't even have to worry about it, because I tend to be more of a conservative, anxious person. I like iteration. I like to be grounded. I like to have feedback from customers. I like to hear about people doing great things with the product and that they're happy about it. I just was talking with someone today about that. They came up to me, and I love that. I don't want to have success hinge on some unknown point sometime in the future. And in fact, that's kind of how we ended up going down the path we did, because we went out and spoke with some VCs and realized that Aaron and I were becoming uncomfortable because we realized we were overpromising. And something we had seen happen over and over again in the robotics world is overpromising, overraising, and then not lasting. And what we believed would be necessary to actually achieve success, because of the timescales involved in robotics, was for us to be able to stay the course, iterate, and continue. I was always disappointed that there wasn't a PR3 from Willow Garage, because I thought you had learned so much and built up such an amazing community. We've hit the stretch 3. We did that about a year ago. It doubled our sales. The community is amazing. We have hundreds of developers, and a lot of that was inspiration, frankly, from Willow Garage. But it was very tough at the beginning, extremely tough. But it's really paid off, and we do have investors now. But it's been a mix. We had NIH funding, we have investors, and we have a profitable core business, which is we're grateful for.
Yeah, that's wonderful. All right, so I want to go back to, and we were talking about time to develop technology, and then I'll open up for questions from the audience. So Rod's third law from this morning, right? He says things take 10 plus years, 30 years. I was going to use the example of Waymo, which. And I was going to trace it back to 2005, but then Rod took us back 20 years before that. It's truly new research technology, truly new technologies coming from research can take 20 plus years to get out there. So how do you trace back, where do you trace back for each of your startups the core technology that you're using, and how far back do you think about, like, I could have done this, or I could have done a prototype of this, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever. Go ahead, Charlie, you can go first.
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, I believe in that whole 70-year window that Rod kind of painted. We're all building on that. There's no doubt about it. And I mean, I remember being in Rod's lab when there was the iRobot IPO and just watching how excited he was, and it's like amazing, and robots in millions of homes, and I was trying to think about what's next, Oh, mobile manipulation, it's going to be the get me a beer robot, and it took longer, and it's still taking longer than I think I had imagined back then. But yeah, let's say, here's a date, 2008, my lab, we kind of released Ellie. It was our first mobile manipulator, and we did work with people with ALS, and they found it quite useful. It was in the New York Times. It got a lot of attention. So 20 years later, maybe, yeah, I could see it. 2028, I could see us having a Hello Robot launching with a successful assistive product that finally brings that dream and makes it a reality. But we'll see.
So 20 years. How about you, Andrea?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, I mean, it kind of gets back to one of your questions earlier, like what's surprising. I think the surprise has been how much you have to just like continue to scope what you're trying to deliver in order to get that reliability that's needed to function as a reliable product that people actually will use. Because there's any amount of research from learning from demonstration back in 2005 or 2008, or even the way that we're doing perception. It has relation to the way we're doing perception 8 years ago to the way like new models are doing it today. It's an iteration, and we're making use of novel approaches. But adding that in a way that's reliable and robust, I think, is the part that's been fascinating to kind of take that hybrid approach, because you can't release a product that has 80% success rate.
Yeah, it also varies by market, turns out. So I discovered when we started Savvy Oak, we put robots in hotels first, and there's a lower success rate necessary to have success in hotels than there is in hospitals, right? Because you can, fail to deliver an ice cream bar, and the worst that happens is you have a mess in the robot if it melts, right? But if you fail to deliver somebody's biopsy and you have to call them back and say, we need another one, that's different, right? That's a lot worse. And so, just the requirements by domain is interesting. Peter, how about you? Trace back in time.
Yeah, I mean, the 70-year illusion is a good one. I think we're all building on top of each other's work all the time. I think nobody builds frontier, cutting-edge models or robots without building on top of a lot of other people's work. So maybe I'll reframe the question a little bit. When is kind of the moment where it felt like, yeah, I now believe this is a good time to start doing this? And to me, that was looking at essentially ImageNet was this competition that kind of triggered the whole deep learning revolution set up by Professor Fei-Fei Li here at Stanford. 2012 was the big breakthrough from Jeff Vinton and his students, showing that a neural net can recognize what's in images pretty well, much better than anything anybody ever tried before. But then seeing the progression from there, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, it just like every year things got better, 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 and it felt like as people just tried many different angles, different ways of architecting the neural net, throwing in more data augmentation, things just kept improving. And it felt just like there was a path. If you're willing to try hard enough, you could get a computer to see what's in front of it. And that's kind of key for a lot of robotics applications, is if the robot cannot recognize what's in front of it, you're kind of already lost for many applications before you start, because that's a kind of context that's assumed for many, many tasks that you're able to generate. And so seeing that rundown, to me, made me think, okay, it seems like if we really focus in the space we care about, we might be able to run it down. The other thing I would say is that, this goes a little bit to your earlier question, Steve. I think another lesson learned, and maybe there's a lot of nuance to it, but one lesson learned is that if you have to modify the environment, you need a lot of partnership, a lot of collaboration with whichever customer you're working with. If you want to modify a facility and put in a robot that has a certain footprint, you need to partner very closely with that customer. And that involves a lot of overhead, or phrased negatively, involves a lot of friction that you have to overcome. And so I think one thing that's changing dramatically as we see, I would say, humanoid robots, not necessarily with legs, but wheels or legs and 2 arms, I think that amount of friction will rapidly go down, because all of a sudden, if your robot can do it, it might be able to do it without introducing the friction of environment modification. And I think that's probably, like, if I think about it, the biggest enabler of the new form factors that are coming out is not so much, are they exactly humanoid or not? Maybe it's none of your robots are exactly humanoid in the kind of strict sense of 2 legs, 2 arms, but neither of your robots requires environment adaptation. That you just deliver them and they do their thing. And I think that will reduce friction dramatically in future robot efforts compared to the more traditional industrial cells.
Yeah.
So I do think we'll see a much faster path as many more of these robots become mature.
I think one thing that I learned is you always should still ask, right? Because when you ask, you sometimes get an answer that's not what you expect. So, we had problems with the robot can't get over some threshold. We're like, oh, we have to redesign the suspension. Actually, just ask them, they'll make a smoother threshold, right? A hotel that's like an easy change for them. They've got a maintenance guy on staff. They do that stuff all the time. We assumed it would be hard, right? On the other hand, getting the elevator company to do anything is enormously difficult and expensive, and that's miserable. So you don't always get the answer that you want, but it's worth asking in the environment, because you don't know what will change. But yeah, go ahead, Charlie.
I was just going to comment, because I think it's a really important point that does get lost. You don't have to have a humanoid form, which is obviously like a person, to interface with a human environment. There are ways you can do that that are just not direct mimicry. Examples with Stretch, it's got the width of the robot is about 50th percentile human hip width. The reach of the robot is about 50th percentile human arm reach. And the head of the robot is about where it would be when someone is sort of between sitting and standing. So the robot, what we talk about it as is we say it's robotic cubism. So if you think of Picasso and Cubism, you look at those paintings, if you squint, there can be a person in there. You pull the person apart, and then you can put them back together in a way that's not just direct mimicry, but still represents the key attributes that are required to interface well with the human environment, work with people, that kind of thing.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I would agree as well. And I think it's a great point that, and it's a huge part of the way we've, I think, had a quicker ability to get to market with hospitals in particular who don't want to do very much for you. I agree, it's good to ask, because a lot of times we like to say we don't ask them to do anything that they wouldn't do to make their environment better for people too. And so usually we're asking them to get the environment to be ADA compliant, because that's what the robot needs to go over this threshold. So I think that is a great way to think about the form factors, supporting the task you want to do, and try to make that as frictionless as possible. Because I think for a long time still, the biggest barrier to commercializing robotics, the biggest competitor is the status quo of what people are doing without robots at all. And so, you have to build something that is, better than them, not having robots at all. So that's, I think, an interesting way to think about it too.
That's great. Any questions from the audience?
Hi, I'm a double computer science alumni here. I wanted to get your thoughts on the efforts by Tesla and OpenAI for the humanoids. What are your thoughts, because they make it sound like it's imminent. Maybe that's in their interest, but what are your thoughts? And with respect to iRobot, you mentioned about it's almost going to be going out of business, apparently, based on recent news. The Zumba maker iRobot, you mentioned about. Recent news says that they are doing some special looking into their viability. If you have any thoughts on that.
Which company? I didn't.
iRobot, the Zumba.
Oh, the Roomba.
The Zumba, yeah. Such a successful product. I mean, what went wrong?
Yeah. You guys anybody want to speculate on what went wrong with Roomba?
I'm the wrong person to ask, but
Rod could.
yeah.
Rod here, right
There we
there.
go. Rod will tell you. This is great. The panel expands.
It's like amazing.
Delegation.
I don't exactly know because I sold all my shares in 2011. But they had an acquisition offer from Amazon at a few $1 billion 2 years ago. It got held up by European regulators, and that whole thing was just in stasis. And when Amazon couldn't buy them, it was too late. There may have been a little too much relaxation from the executive team having that multi-billion-dollar offer from Amazon, maybe.
Interesting.
And I also just want to say, regardless of what happens today, the reality is that iRobot changed the world. And it was over 20 years ago that they had a fully autonomous robot in homes, millions of homes, doing a useful task. And that is an amazing achievement, one that, as a roboticist, has just, I'm still in awe of it. I can't believe we haven't really been able to follow up on that at such a scale.
Yeah, I would say, in spite of the specific company issues, the category that iRobot invented goes strong, right? Continues to be strong. And I think, to your point, Charlie, when Will Agrad started and we were saying, like, is it even possible to go build a robot for the world? There was, the DARPA Grand Challenge had just happened successfully for the first time 2 years before, and Roombas were out in the world, and we said, yeah, maybe it's time for robots to come out of the factory. And that was a really important proof point.
Yeah, maybe if I can answer the humanoid part. Obviously, there's a lot of effort going into humanoid robots right now, not just in the US, across the world. I think maybe every month or maybe every week, there's a new humanoid company that builds hardware or tries to build hardware. And I think it's progressing really, really fast. And I think it goes a little bit back to something Andrea said earlier, which is sometimes there's a confluence of things that allows you to build things that were maybe not possible to build before. In this case, the way I see it, it's essentially electric motors have become better than they used to be, thanks to various other market forces. And all of a sudden, these electric motors are good enough to build something like humanoid. Now, is it really good enough is an open question, because can it have enough payload? Maybe not. Maybe they can just carry themselves. So there's still some open questions in terms of, are they really going to be strong enough with the current design paradigm? And if you change the paradigm, are they going to be safe? Because it's nice to have lightweight motors, because it's safer, lightweight humanoid, but then maybe not enough payload. So a lot of questions still. But I think one thing to me that's really interesting is if you follow the space, you might have seen an announcement just this past week or last week from Figure, another one of the companies building humanoids. And they showed their humanoid robot doing a task in a BMW factory over in Germany, I believe. And when you look at the task, at least my knee-jerk reaction is, okay, that's a pretty simple task. Like, that could be done with traditional automation. You're taking like the same item every time and then putting it somewhere else. This is a traditional automation task. Don't need an AI revolution for it. As you know, maybe it uses AI, but it wasn't necessary to get this done. But I think at the same time, that's exactly what's so interesting about it. Here was a task that could have been done with traditional automation, but maybe because of the overhead of how do you put a big industrial work cell in there, it wasn't done. And hence it was still available for a mobile robot. I don't know if the robot really needed legs, this one had legs, but a mobile robot that can just kind of scooch in there and come and help. And so I think this is a very interesting sign of how when you can insert your robot more readily without interruption of everything, all of a sudden things open up that might not be open to you otherwise, independent of the level of AI that might be used or not be used. So I do think there's a big shift that's starting to happen, and that's like a real world sign of this starting to happen.
Yeah, I just build on that. I think, not everybody realizes. I was surprised when I visited my first industrial robotics company 20 years ago, and they explained that the robot cost is typically half of the cost of the installation. And I think it's only gotten worse, actually. I think as we go forward, somehow the installation costs keep going higher, or maybe because the robot costs are going lower. And so as a fraction, the robot isn't even 50% of the cost anymore, it's less. And that was true for relay robotics as well, because of just putting a robot into a facility. I don't know if you guys saw the relay demo out there, but that demo, took Zen Yaskawa sitting in the back there, probably 10 minutes to map and set up. It's easy. But if you actually wanted to sort of navigate this whole building through the elevators and everything, that is a serious, expensive task, because you've got to get the elevator companies out. The mapping isn't the hard part. It's it's getting from floor to floor that's actually the hard part. And it's probably also, maybe the mirrors, the windows, the glass walls. These are the things that makes it hard. If you put a robot in a hotel lobby and say, can you map the hotel lobby? I mean, anybody can do that. You can do that with ROS 2 open source out of the box, I suspect. So that notion that, the robot is one part of the cost, if we can get the other part down, I think that's, just to Peter's point, just echoing.
Yeah, and I guess I would just point out that I think the excitement around humanoids is exactly like we're talking about, this ability to put robots into an environment with less infrastructure, not having that huge cost, but it's mobile manipulation as a category, of which humanoids is a part of that. And it's absolutely, like our robots, you drop them into the hospital, they have to map the whole environment, and then you have to train the arm with a tiny bit of data collected on site of how to manipulate every item in the hospital that you need to manipulate, which is, we have other hospitals where they've agreed to, help us get in touch with the elevator company and set up the software, and it's very, very hard to get to get the robots to talk to the elevator companies. So it's, we found a lot easier to just push the buttons.
I'll try to be quick. I just was going to say, I think Rod did a great job in his talk earlier today about humanoids. And there are use cases, I don't doubt. And there are use cases, in fact, where a humanoid is perfect, like the acrobatic Spider-Man at Disney World. I mean, that should got to be a humanoid. Or if it's a robot that's going to test out personal protective gear. I've seen things like that, and make sure that it's going to, you can move around in that suit without these dangerous chemicals getting in. I mean, there are things where humanoid is the way. It's but there are also a lot of places where there are a lot of options, and sometimes the humanoid will win out, and sometimes it won't. I think, as Rod, just to reiterate what Rod said, that the big risk, I think, for society and individuals is just when you see a humanoid robot, it's easy to forget the gigantic gap between that humanoid robot that looks like a person and what an actual person is able to do. And that's not just on the AI side, that is on the physical side. Like the human body, like the hand, there have been some amazing projects like the ACT hand where they really tried to go in depth and just incredibly complex. Like the human body is incredibly complex. And some of that complexity does in fact play a role in our ability to do the things that we do. And so you just have to be careful because it's easy to jump to conclusions.
Yeah, good answer.
Thank you. My name is Rain. Apologize for the weather today. So I was a former Stanford student and current VC investor. I recently heard a lot of concept about automation. As discussed by the panelists, there are some automation systems in the logistics warehouses already. Some levels of automation in the hospital healthcare system. Very recently, I think in the recent 2 weeks, maybe, I hear about automation systems even in the life science laboratory, in the labs. So I want to get a quick thought from each panelist. How likely do you think we're going to achieve that in the next few years, maybe?
Yeah, I can say one quick thing. I'm not an expert in the life science laboratories, but we did research them a little bit in the first year of Covariant to see, okay, what are the opportunities there? And our understanding was at the time that essentially anything that's liquid handling experimentation is already automatable with existing equipment. And so now if you go to a university lab, you often won't see it because they don't have the money to pay for the equipment, though maybe some university labs do, but many of them don't. But once you go to industrial labs, you'll see a lot of it is extremely automated as long as it involves liquid handling. Once it goes outside of liquid, it seems a very different world. And we didn't really get a good sense of how that world works, but it didn't seem very automated at that time.
Yeah, I would say I expect it to be pretty automated too, because for me the big difference is controlled environment versus uncontrolled human environment or natural environment, right? And commercial buildings are an interesting middle point because you have the Americans with Disabilities Act, you have flat floors, you have the ability to use wheels in a lot of cases. But when you go into a lab where you can presumably completely control the lab, it's a manufacturing environment, the game changes and I would expect a lot of automation. I think the interesting question maybe for the panel is we could speculate on why there isn't more automation in factories given that it's a controlled environment. My understanding is it's still about like 30% of the tasks are automated. And do you think that's going to continue to go up, and at what kind of pace? Because industrial robots have been growing pretty steadily, and I haven't seen a big inflection point in that curve, even if you look back over 20 years.
I'm Yanan. I'm also a former member of HAI at Stanford. I'm a current faculty member at Tsinghua University in Beijing. So a quick question that comparing to 15 years ago, how do you think that we should train the next generation of experts, the current PhD students, in order to help them to do either research or making a real-world impact? Thank you.
I'll leave it to the professors.
I mean, I think it's a hard question because things are evolving quickly, obviously. Knowledge can be at your fingertips so much faster even than just a year or two ago. You can ask ChatGPT, Perplexity, Gemini, any kind of question, and most of the time it'll know things that are very hard to know otherwise. You can give it a deep research query and it can probably write an entire consulting report for you on some kind of industry that is comparable to real consulting reports. So it's pretty hard to think that through. I think in the end, maybe it's about thinking about the very fundamentals that I think make people successful. I think it's a combination of like being good at logical thinking and thinking through like problems. And I guess you need to encourage students not to cheat by forcing them to actually think through things as they do their work. I think the other one is I think it's pretty important to be very driven, and so things that make them excited, I guess, and put energy into things, but also get them to be self-motivated maximally somehow. And I think the third part is everything's done in teams, and anything big is done in teams. And so I think anything that teaches the students to work together and see the benefits and reap the benefits of working together, I think those three are kind of building blocks that are pretty guaranteed. But how to turn that into a curriculum, I think is a whole different question.
Yeah, I'll just add to that a little bit. I was talking to Jeanette Vogue. She visited Diligent the other day, and we were talking about just this, like how there's so much happening. It's changing so fast, and how do you, as a student, as a lab, think about keeping up with everything. So I think that's one skill, is really just being able to fail fast on any new ideas and decide that this is something that you want to pursue or not, and not like taking a large amount of time on something. And then I'll kind of lead back to some things that Rod was saying this morning, like don't lose sight of some of the problems that people aren't talking about. I think that's a pretty interesting thing. If I was doing my PhD today, I'd be looking the other direction from what everybody's focused on.
Yeah, I guess I just say I think project-based learning is a great way to learn, and we're in a fortunate age where there are so many open models out there that you can actually work with, and the technology is actually surprisingly widely available, and you can get hands-on experience. And fortunately, we're living in an age when it's easier than ever to get robots that you can actually work with, and some of the things where I was most surprised by is just like I taught a course, and it was a project-based course. Each team of 7 students, there were undergraduates and masters. Some were biomedical engineers, some were roboticists, and they would work with the stretch robot, and it was theirs, and they would take it out into the world and actually engage with people. And I saw these projects and ideas that I never would have thought of. So not only can they learn, but they can actually innovate. And so I think it's a great time for education, and I'm excited for the next generation.
That's great. Well, with that, I'll thank you all for the great questions and thank our panelists.